over the years, there's been a spate of signings from the Bundesliga that, to be fair, haven't quite gone to plan. Manchester United have had a little bit of experience ourselves, Mkhitaryan, Shinji Kagawa, recently Jadon Sancho. But the two real big high-profile ones coming over from Bundesliga that you thought were going to have a massive impact and didn't at least initially have a major impact was Timo Werner and Kai Havertz, signed by Chelsea from RB Leipzig and Bayer Leverkusen. And it got me thinking, where do successful Premier League side signings come from? What is the most effective way for Premier League clubs to bring in signings? Is there a league that stands out above the others? Is there a league that is worse than the others? Is there a league that's best suited to players coming in from the Premier League? The eye test tells me the physicality and speed of the French league is the one I would assume most closely aligns to the Premier League. And when you look at Eden Hazard and you look at Kante and other players that have come from France and done pretty well immediately, you kind of go, there's a little bit of evidence to this. Now, that's an extremely small, off the top of my head, sample size. I know someone who's done a little bit of work into this, and they sort of told me that they didn't use it in a scientific sense. There's two sort of bits of research going on here. There's a guy called Mark R. Stats on Twitter, at Mark R. Stats, and I'll drop a link into his profile below. And what he's done is he's compared non-penalty expected goals and expected assists of players the season that they leave one country and the first season that they join another to see if there's a rise or a fall in their performance. Somebody else that I know has done a little bit of research, and they looked into, and this is a far more subjective one, where they said, would they make that transfer again? So, for example, Manchester United, Harry Maguire, would you make that transfer again? No, you wouldn't. Manchester United, Bruno Fernandes, would you make that transfer again? Yes, you would. So this one's a very opinion-based, very subjective. I went through quite a lot with this individual. Happens to be an agent. And the stuff that was sort of breaking from that was leaning towards La Liga, which surprised me, I'll be honest with you. I didn't necessarily think it was the best suited. So across the top 5 leagues, let's use the basis of this really for the more stats-based rather than subjective ones. The more stats-based one, Mark R Stats on Twitter. Like I said, I'll throw the link in the description for that one. But let's have a look at which ones translate, supposedly, at least based on expected goals, non-penalty expected goals, and expected assists. Now, obviously, the result of whether a player plays well or not, no matter where they come from, is down to an endless number of factors. You've got settling in, you've got home life, you've got injuries, you've got the performance of the club. You know, quite often a player might be a standout, say in France or La Liga, and then he's coming to maybe a lower down team in the Premier League, potentially because of the wage difference between the Premier League and some other leagues. The league that they come from is definitely not the only factor in whether they're a success or not. But I think it'd be really interesting to see if there is a correlation from any particular leagues. Now, obviously, factors like age, the individual player quality, the stage they're at in their career, the manager, the squad that they arrive at and leave from, these are things that are arguably more important than which league they came from. But it's very difficult to sort of categorize that kind of data, isn't it? So you also got to remember that the data fails to consider players improving after their first season, which I think we saw a lot of with Kai Havertz this season. And also, it's very difficult for defenders, because defenders are not going to have high expected goals or expected assists, and you wouldn't expect that to massively fluctuate with moving clubs. But the results are interesting. So let's go through them then. So, La Liga, Spain. The data goes back to 2017-18, and the XG and the expected assists of players joining the Premier League from La Liga goes up by an average of 10.2%. Are we the farmers? Not quite. But it's unique in terms of it's the only league which generally sees, over the last 4 seasons, a positive increase when they come to the Premier League. Philip Coutinho, Martin Odegaard, Rodri. These are all examples of players who saw an increase in both XG and XA when they moved from Spain to England within the time frame of the data gathered. Why? Now, one argument for that is the style of play Pep brought to England has been largely successful. And when I say largely successful, I'm not talking about Manchester City. I'm talking about its adaptation across the rest of the league. There's a lot of other people have adopted similar traits in the way they play. It's obviously been successful for City. Other teams are moving towards more possession-based styles of play. And it can be argued that actually the Premier League and the Liga are more closely aligned than they ever have been. When you look at United, 2007, 2008, we were doing 458 passes per game. Manchester City, last season, not the season just gone, 687 passes per game. Premier League still remains a lot more physical, but even the lower teams in the Premier League are more possession-based now than they were in the early 2000s for sure, but even in the 2010s. As a result of the leagues being a lot more similar now, perhaps even more so than what you're seeing in Italy, in Germany, and in France, that typical possession sort of favoritism and style of player coming from Spain are seemingly having good lives and good careers and good success in England. Germany then. Now, Germany is a bit of a hipsters league at the moment. You've got RB Leipzig doing bits, Bayern Munich just all conquering as they always do, Dortmund, a real fan favourite. Players go there and just explode. Absolutely explode. Don't know what it is they do, but players put up redonkulous numbers when they play for Dortmund. Go and look at what Mkhitaryan did, even what Kagawa did, what Jadon Sancho did was unfathomable, what Haaland has been doing. It's outrageous. And then you look at what like Florian Wirtz and that are doing at the moment. It's mind-boggling. And it's the polar opposite to Spain. Bundesliga players coming over to the Premier League see a 38.3% decrease in expected goals and expected assists in their first season since joining the Premier League. And that is significant. And it's more significant than any of the other leagues. It's such a steep drop-off. It's enough to start calling everybody that you sign a flop, put it that way. I mentioned earlier, there's obviously big names who haven't really worked out in their first season from Bundesliga. The drop-off from the players like Havertz and Werner and Sancho might make fans think twice about what Erling Haaland is going to do. I'm not sure his style of play suits it, but I think he will get so many opportunities, and I think he's such a good striker of the ball. He's probably going to score a shitload of goals still, but it'll be very interesting if he doesn't, and he sort of correlates to what this list is saying. What's the main difference between Bundesliga and England? I think it's probably the physicality. It's a high-scoring league with an average of 3.12 goals per game. The Premier League is near enough a third of a goal less, 2.82. That straight away tells us that you should be expecting a drop-off in goals because there's less goals being scored. Werner said it after a game against Brighton. He goes, I played against 3 massive defenders. You don't get that in Germany, which is a massively sweeping statement because you absolutely do, but his experience was saying that you just don't get that sort of thing. The Premier League is more physical than German football. It's also more defensive than German football. German football loves the counter-attack. All teams love to play in the opposition half. Gegenpressing is extremely popular in a way that possession football is popular in Spain. So you see a broad, obviously there's differences, but there's a broad stroke of teams liking to play in the opposition half, which means when attacks happen, if you think back to all the Haaland and Sancho goals that you've seen, you're seeing people running at 1 and 2 defenders in a half while the rest of the team is chasing back. That's a typical kind of Bundesliga-style goal. The standard of football in Germany is also not good. They've had 2 teams make it to the last 16 of the Champions League compared to England's 4. Away from Bayern, a German side hasn't really taken anything of note in Europe since Dortmund in 1997. So even though there's good teams pop up occasionally, we saw Schalke, we've seen Dortmund, we've seen Bayer Leverkusen do all right. They're not doing the real big stuff in Europe, and they're not doing it in mass numbers. It's a runaway league that one team bullies, and then you have a bit of a fan favourite like Dortmund is able to play some quite exciting stuff. But overall, the depth and the standard just isn't there like it is in other leagues. Italy and France. These don't actually have as steep a drop-off as Germany does, but expected goals and expected assists do drop from Serie A and Liga. In these leagues, the main reason for the adaptation, I think, is the quality between the two leagues. Serie A has always been like a very defensive and tactical kind of league where you see a lot of three at the back. You see a lot of teams that are almost the polar opposite to what you get in Germany, where you're seeing teams flooding forward. In Italy, you're seeing people leave 5 back, waiting for that counter and preventing that counter. There's been a little bit of a resurgence of sleeping giants, like both Milan and Inter being successful and winning titles in recent years is massive for the popularity and quality of Italian football. Prior to that, it was Juventus was the only team that could do anything. And that's probably been for 10 years or more, it felt like. And this almost goes back to the match fixing scandal that they had, which decimated. Crowds went, the quality went, nobody wanted to go there. The money went, the sponsorships went. And as a result, the league really, really dropped off. Juventus was just kind of sweeping up every year, still maintaining to be competitive on the European circuit, but there was no competition for them domestically. It's even worse in France. PSG, obviously, I mean, last year they didn't do anything, but they've won every single title bar. They've won like 8 out of the last 10, something like that. Look at Lukaku, flopped at United, got it Inter, flopped at Chelsea. Still scores a sizable number of goals, and still did score a sizable number of goals at United. But he went to Italy and has got a better record at Inter than R9 did. If that doesn't tell you about how modern football has become a lot more increased in goal scoring and how the Italian league is worse than it was certainly in the 90s when R9 was there, nothing will. So should this guide any sort of opinions from when United are signing players this season? We're linked with players from Portugal, we're linked with players from Germany, and we are linked with players from Spain. Based on the expected assists and the expected goals, it looks like Spain's a good bet. It does seem like there is a bit of a correlation between what players can do in Spain and what players can do in England. But where would be good to sign a defender? Where would be good to sign a central midfielder? That's not something that gets answered in this conversation. For me, I'd actually like to see, can we sign a defender from the league that there's a high goal scoring in? Because if you're a good defender that looks like a good defender in a league where there is high goal scoring, when it is a bit more defensive and a bit more physical in the Premier League, if you've got those attributes, I think there's a good chance you're going to be a success. The French league is another quick league. It's another physical league. Could that be the place that you try and look for your midfielders? Is there anything broad brush-wise that you can go for from here? Could be very interesting to see. And counterintuitively, signing and Lukaku's bucks this trend, but signing strikers that do well in Italy, which is a low-scoring league, should have been a good thing. Signing defenders from Italy, which is a low-scoring league, you think is a good thing because it's a defensive league. But you get the same sort of situation where you sign Harry Maguire because he plays in a counter-attacking side and is protected by people. And therefore, you don't actually get to see what he's like. And is he capable of defending on the halfway line? You want to sign players that are playing in a system and a style that you're going to play in. If you want to play on the halfway line, you need to find a player that's playing on the halfway line and defending on the halfway line. And this is why some people think John Terry's a good defender. He was protected by Makelele and Essien and the better centre-half in Carvalho, and he was never really tested to the sort of extent that Stam and Vidic and Rio were, playing on the halfway line in teams that dominate the ball and look to attack at all times, and with 40 metres in behind them that they've got to defend and got to cover and be alert for at all times. That's why signing the correct player, playing in the position that you want him to. I made a massive mistake in Wan-Bissaka. I saw what he was doing from a defensive point of view. You didn't see enough of what he was doing from an offensive point of view at Crystal Palace, but I assumed, clearly wrongly, well, he was a Premier League winger at one point. He can't be shit on the ball, can he? I'm sure he can probably get up to speed. Clearly, I was incorrect on that. And maybe there was some people at United that made that same mistake as well, thinking that this kid was a Premier League winger. He must have some sort of technical ability on the ball. Add that to the defensive ability, which he's got 1v1 defending is fantastic. But then you ask him to be in a possession-based team that's looking to attack all the time, and he just looks completely out of place. La Liga seems to be the spot. I would argue that you want to be getting the players from the top end of La Liga. But how feasible is that? Anyway, that's my thoughts. Let us know in the comments. Where should we be looking at signing players from? Some of the ones that we've been linked to. Does this change your opinion on whether they'd be a success or a failure or not? Let me know in the comments. Catch you in the next one. Laters. Hey, thank you for watching the video. If you are new around these parts, then don't forget to subscribe. My channel is proudly supported by my community on Patreon. If you'd like to get a little bit of extra content, a Discord group, meetups, five-a-side games, weekly podcasts, behind the scenes, and even an occasional bit of transfer news as and when I get it, then for the price of a pint, you can show your appreciation for the content that we make and get some goodies for doing so as well. Check the link in the description or click the button right here. You'll also find all of my socials here too if you want to follow me on any of those platforms. Nice one.